Good evening, good morning to everyone. I was going to talk about human rights in Islam, but I thought that rather than doing too much political analysis, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with to a certain extent, let me address the issues head on for the now, for the present, for here, because they are critical in a certain way that Mr. Bennett referred to. And so my talk, it's not going to be necessarily a critique of what he said, but I think I'm going to be in certain ways in agreement with him. And that is that the human rights issue has been turned into a political football, as we say, which it's being dragged around from one side to the other, and we use a whole lot of cherry picking in trying to see where does it apply, and when it is applied, whom does it benefit? And it's because of that that there is no a human rights standard that is human rights centered. Rather, it's human rights jargons and slogans that are manipulated primarily for political exploitation and for manipulation to advance certain policies. And it's because of that, I think, again, partially in agreement with what Mr. Bennett says, is that in this cherry picking context, we see that when it comes, for instance, to the crisis in Palestine, human rights don't count as if they are not humans. Whereas when it comes to Afghanistan, it counts, but only selectively. Human rights have been violated in Afghanistan, not in the last 5 years, but before too, of course, under a different genre and in a different form. And part of it was that sometimes they were clothed in westernization in places where the cultural values were trampled on. They were prioritized in terms of what the West wanted to do with Afghanistan. Afghanistan suffered from such clash of cultures back in 1920s, a century ago, except that we became the culprit one more time now in the 2020s, just to pick on the 2020, like there was no 2020 vision in that. Rather, it was the powerful dictating to those who happen to be victimized by circumstance, victimized by militarism. And then, of course, on top of that, we have another victimization, which is, for lack of a better term, I would call it religious despotism. And the talk that I had prepared had basically to do with how much Islam, as a movement, as a religion of enlightenment, contributed to the world society in terms of rights, the rights that the Quran give, the rights that the Prophet give and shared with people when he became a prophet. But more importantly, the rights that Prophet Muhammad started with before he even becomes a prophet. That he had three, I would say, civil rights and human rights movements that were addressing the discrimination in the Arabian society of the time against women, which was his campaign number one, against slaves, long before Abraham Lincoln and the Brits came around to consider that humanity deserves to be treated equally. And also in terms of economic equality, long before Marx and Engels, in suggesting that the Quran repeatedly adds pray and give to the poor. Aqimus salata wa atu zakat. For those of us who recite the Quran, those two words are never separate. And the idea was that you cannot have social justice unless you have economic justice alongside with it. And so, when we are talking about human rights in that sense, we also can talk about the human rights that were granted based on the human dignity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Human rights that were given on the basis of how we all human beings, regardless of color and shades and all that, were created from a single soul. إِنَّا خَلَقْنَا مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى. Or the other instance where it says that we have created you from a single soul, مِنْ نَفْسٍ واحدة. So this emphasis on equality at the time we are talking 1400 years ago was were those things. And then of course the Quran comes and establishes basic human rights that we champion here in the West, but they come from there in the sense that number one, we have the right to speech, and we have the right to have a belief regardless of any coercion, which is very, very clear state that there are no instances of the coercion of faith on people. And the Quran is also clearly telling us that you even have the right to reject whatever faith you have. The point is, yes, you can have a faith, but you also have the right to reject it over and over and over. And again, this is the emphasis of the repetition of this. It's unprecedented in human history. And so then when we come to the rights of the prisoners of war, that the Prophet said we can free them if they can teach someone, the economic qualities and all that. And so I think when we look at it in that sense, the right of citizens, the right of believers or non-believers within a society where the laws of the believers should not be imposed on the non-believers and vice versa. The right of a worker who is entitled to his or her pay upon the completion of the project. The right of the right of property that we have John Locke preaching here to the West 12 centuries later. That's what it was said when the Prophet went on during the opening of Mecca. The first announcement that was made was that everyone's property is secured. In terms of family rights, the matrimonial ceremony included a give and take in which the right of both were guaranteed, and women were given the right to property, which is in the Mahriya, part of, again, that same arrangement. The right to identity, which is very critical. Like, for instance, here in the West, if you adopt a child, you give them your name, you just give them your identity just because of the circumstance. They had no other way to go. Whereas in Islam, it is forbidden. You cannot, for instance, when the Prophet adopted Zayn bin Harisa, and someone said, Ibn Muhammad, and he says, no. He has a father and a mother and his own identity we have to protect and respect and keep that where it is. So the rights for even plants and vegetations. During the Badr, when the Quraysh were attacking, the Prophet said, the first thing you do not trample on the plants and vegetations and fields of people. And his companions said, like, wait a minute, we are being killed. Says, yeah, they might have come to kill you, but you are not to kill the plants and vegetations before that. They have rights upon you. And so we can go through a whole long list of how Islam defines rights, human rights, including other forms of rights. But the point is that if we are living in a hypocrisy, as Mr. Bennett referred to earlier, then there's not much hope because for some reason the pendulum has swung the other way. And I meant it has swung to the right. And in this, we have the religious right, at least here in I'm here in the United States, that the religious right seems like they have an entitlement to defining not only what human rights are, but even they're claiming other people's properties, gulfs and islands and states to be ours. I think the post-Cold War time or the Cold War time was a wonderful time for humanity through liberalism and prioritizing human rights. A whole lot was achieved. The establishment of the United Nations itself is an unprecedented successful feat that should not have been abandoned. But just the same way that Mr. Bennett is, in a sense, complaining and rightfully complaining that he is marginalized, human rights and institutional marginalized, the United Nations is marginalized. It's just because the powerful have to play with the destiny of those of us who are economically less fortunate. And I don't know when and how the pendulum is going to swing back. But until that happens, we have to do the best we can to be not just selective. Yes, there is no doubt that human rights are violated in Afghanistan. But it's not only in Afghanistan. In our neighboring countries, the same thing happens. And again, our sense of selectivity and using human rights as slogans so that just we can advance Western foreign policies and make them look right when down deep we know they are not right. And that's where it goes back to the popular saying that when might makes right, then right goes out the window, including human rights. And let me stop at this. Thank you.